Michael, HRNZ Forums, you had the opportunity to attend one today. What did you make of that?
Interesting process, Greg, and big hi to everybody watching at home. I think it's really hard for harness racing, for all codes, but harness racing in particular, to embrace any level of change. But quite clearly, with the dates the horses officially change age going to know the 1st of January, this is the perfect time to make changes if they need to be made. There's a couple of things I think we don't need to change. I think Cup Week works pretty well, or better than pretty well. And I think the Jewels is a great concept, which I would like to see move to a warmer time. So after that, almost everything else feels like it's in play, Greg. There's some really interesting stuff around race programming. I think the hardest part is people thinking we're doing this now, or we've done this for the last 20 years, so why don't we keep doing that, rather than saying, let's pretend none of that exists, and let's try and build the best possible model heading forward.
And isn't that it? Because we have the blank canvas, that here we do have a wonderful opportunity.
We have the chance to do it. And there's things like Kaikoura and Westport and the grass track circuits at Motokorau that work. So you don't muck around with those because they drive a lot of turnover. But you say to yourself, where do we want the major carnivals to go? I don't want them to go in winter. Going to harness racing major meetings in winter isn't much fun. I don't want them to go hard up against great gallops days, because we've seen in the north that no matter how good a race day you put on at Alexandra Park, if it's hard up against Ellerslie having a better day, you lose because not many people go to the races back to back. And we're seeing that at Show Day at Addington, Greg, with Cup Day becoming so big at Riccarton. It's the biggest cannibalisation of what's happening on Show Day. So I think we need to be really realistic about where it all fits together. And I also think that in an industry with a couple of thousand participants, not everybody's going to get what they want.
Yep.
So you've got to say, is this for the betterment of the industry, or is this what I want? And they're two very different conversations.
Michael, there's some huge challenges in harness racing, and in particular our market share, very much so in Australia. Are there a couple of areas that you'd work on to try and enhance that problem?
I think getting the calendar right would help, because we saw a massive turnover at the Jewels. I think 5 or 6 of the biggest turnover races in June were at the Jewels. Yep. Which is proof to me that having presenters on track matters. Now, I used to be a presenter on track. I won't be there. This has got nothing to do with me. It's simply to do with the fact that if they're your biggest turnover races, you've got to have people on track to drive turnover. I also think that you need to have less restrictions on punters. The harness racing restrictions are very, very tight, and they drive people away from betting. If most people watching this think they can only win a couple of $100, then they're not going to bet. So you need to get those things out of the way. Getting the programming is right. Moving some, for example, Show Day. I'll be happy to move Show Day to a 2 o'clock start, because most people coming to Christchurch, Greg, for Cup Week are coming to socialise. And if they don't have to go to the races at 2 o'clock, it probably works better for the local economy. I think we shouldn't be scared of change. I'm not unhappy with the potential move of the Auckland Cup away from New Year's Eve to a March or a May. That doesn't bother me too much. A Jules coming back the other way doesn't bother me. Races like the Derbies and the Oaks, I don't think people really care where they are. The Derbies sort of sat in April-ish, sort of late March-ish, but it doesn't have its established date.
Yep.
So if we move that to another time of the year, it doesn't really matter. They've moved the Victoria Derby and the Victoria Oaks, and they're big races and most people just don't care. So I think it's important to get away from winter, get away from the major galloping carnivals for your biggest races, and then try and put them on. But when you put those races on, put on a show. Whether 6 or 8 times a year, say harness racing's really cool and really vibrant, and have presenters on track. And I would like to see the TAB say, you're only getting 4 meetings a year, but we'll let you have 8 if you're willing to pay for them.
Yep.
It's a user pays economy now, Greg, so I think that's crucial. And then try and use things like SENZ's new platform on the radio to drive it and say, hey to the gallops, we realise you're bigger, but there's 8 or 10 or 12 days a year or weekends where we deserve our shot. If you can do those things well, people go, well, harness racing's pretty cool. I'm happy enough to go to that. But if your big days aren't done well, Gregory, nothing else matters. And at the moment, the 2 days we do well are the Jewels and New Zealand Cup, and everything else sort of just drifts around. So the enemy or the rival we should be the most scared of is Australian gallops. And at the moment, if you're watching racing in this country, and there's only one way to watch it, really, and that's on trackside, you're being driven more towards Australian galloping action with all that coverage than you are being driven towards New Zealand harness racing action. So I think there's a real call to arms there to say, hey, don't forget about this. This is an important part of the industry. I'm not saying it's the gallops. I'm not saying it's the biggest. But I think that needs to be fixed alongside this calendar. So this time next year, harness racing can contribute more to a pie, which not just feeds the betting industry. It feeds transport truck drivers, it feeds vets, it feeds people who shoe horses. A lot of these people work on both codes, Gregory. And unless we're doing that well, it lessens our chances of keeping racetracks open, because racetracks can't stay open if they're just one code anymore. It's easier to keep them open if they're two. So I think strong harness racing is really important for the galloping economy as well. And I think once we recognise that and stop competing against each other and try and have a solidified national product, then yes, we can have all that wonderful racing coming in from Australia. But we shouldn't do it to the detriment of one of our own codes. And that's got nothing to do with me being involved in harness racing, because I'm heavily involved in gallops too. I think it's really crucial, and I think the betting restrictions are really crucial, because you can't ask people to go to the yearling sales, Greg, and pay $100,000 for a horse and then not let them bet on it. Yep. Or bet to win $400 to $500. That's a disproportionately low number. And with our tote pools being quite low in harness racing, restrictions for the bookies are crucially important, where the pools are higher in the gallop, so you can usually have a bet to make some money. These are things we need to get right now and in this period of change, so that in 6 months or a year's time we can talk about having sustainable turnover, rather than talking about this is going well over here, but some of these things aren't going. Let's fix it all at the same time, Greg. And they're not major fixes, but it just needs us to be open, and the TAB to be open, to change and to everybody getting the same level of fairness.
Did you see enough this afternoon to encourage you that we're going down the right track?
I think the change they're trying to make to the calendar are being made for the right reasons. The hardest part is going to be accepting that I'm used to going to Auckland Cup on a certain day, or I'm used to having the Derby at Alexander Park on this night. It doesn't really matter if you move. You know what doesn't matter? When the Karaka Million was launched, it was on a Sunday night. People forget that. They changed it to Saturday, no one cared. Look, it's better now. It's better, so change if it doesn't work. Put the Dominion on Cup Day. If you don't like it, take it back the next year. This isn't stuff which is going to change anybody's life. Auckland Galloping Cup week used to be 3 days with the Galloping Cup on a Wednesday. Now it's 2 days with the Galloping Cup on a Saturday. No one cares. The public don't care. This is a very small
Put it on, they'll turn up.
Make changes. Yep. Most people start to think about it the day before. Make changes. Sure, leave the Cup week alone. Cup week's pretty darn good. Make changes to things, and if they don't work, re-change them, but make them for the right reasons. Forget about parochialism, forget about the codes, forget about the two different countries. Make them for the right reasons, but there needs to be an element of fairness there, because I genuinely believe, as someone who's heavily involved in both codes, Greg, that in the bigger picture, harness racing is being left behind, and I don't think that is either healthy or fair, considering they were part of the codes who set up the TAB, they started this machine running, they helped set up trackside, and they've already said we're willing not to race on Saturdays. Well, for that, they deserve to get a bigger piece of a pie, which they have helped bake.